the history of women who lived without men. For most of recorded history, women have been defined in relation to men: someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. This patriarchal framing erased or minimized the existence of women who chose or were forced to live without men. Yet, across cultures and centuries, there were always women who resisted or rejected male dominance and built lives for themselves on their own terms. These women might have been queens who refused marriage, mystics who chose celibacy, widows who rebuilt their lives, rebels who defied convention, or pioneers who carved out their own livelihoods. To explore their history is to uncover a hidden lineage of independence, resilience, and courage. Ancient worlds, sacred solitude and independence in ancient civilizations. Women living without men often found their autonomy in spiritual or sacred roles. Priestesses in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece were often unmarried and independent, serving temples and wielding significant influence. In Egypt, priestesses of Isis or Hathor held land, property, and wealth in their own right. Some were widows who chose not to remarry. Others were daughters of elites who dedicated themselves to divine service. Their celibacy and independence allowed them to step outside the constraints of patriarchal family life. In Greece, the Oracle of Delphi was one of the most powerful women of the ancient world. Known as the Pythia, she lived unmarried, often secluded, and spoke prophecies that influenced kings, generals, and statesmen. Her authority derived not from male relatives but from her spiritual status. Similarly, the Vestal Virgins of Rome, sworn to 30 years of celibacy, held a rare position of power and autonomy. They managed state rituals, preserved Rome's sacred fire, and lived outside male guardianship. To harm or disrespect a Vestal was a capital offense, signaling how much authority these women carried by virtue of their independence. Yet, this independence was tolerated largely because it was framed in sacred or communal service. Outside these religious roles, women without men, widows, unmarried women, or wanderers, were often viewed with suspicion. They were vulnerable, yet some managed to transform solitude into power. Medieval worlds, widows, mystics, and rebels. During the Middle Ages, women living without men were often either marginalized or revered. Widows, in particular, occupied a unique social position. A widow who inherited property could become economically independent and gain a measure of autonomy unavailable to married women. In some cases, widows ran businesses, estates, or workshops, providing for themselves and their children without male guardianship. In medieval England, Mary widows became symbols of women who refused to remarry, preferring the freedom widowhood gave them. Mystics and nuns also forged lives outside the control of men. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, musician, and visionary, wielded influence across Europe. She corresponded with popes and emperors while living in a cloistered community of women. Her choice of celibacy and religious life freed her from the expectations of wifehood. Similarly, Julian of Norwich, a 14th century anchorite, chose solitude in a small cell attached to a church, dedicating her life to contemplation and writing. Her work, Revelations of Divine Love, remains a cornerstone of Christian mysticism, and one of the earliest surviving books written in English by a woman. But not all independent women were cloistered. Some lived on the fringes of society as healers, midwives, or rebels. These women often faced persecution, especially during witch hunts. The witch trials of Europe in the 15th–17th centuries disproportionately targeted women who lived alone, widows, spinsters, or healers without husbands. Their independence was perceived as threatening to male-dominated social order. This reveals how deeply patriarchal systems feared women who existed outside male control. Renaissance and early modern era. Creativity and resistance. With the Renaissance came a flowering of female creativity, though still constrained by patriarchy. Independent women writers, artists, and thinkers began to emerge, often unmarried or widowed, free from the demands of domesticity. In Italy, women like Artemisia Gentileschi, though married briefly, built much of her life and career independently, painting powerful works that challenged male-dominated art. The early modern period also saw the rise of in France women, like Madame de Rambouillet and Madame Geoffrin, who hosted intellectual salons. Many of these women were widowed or chose not to remarry, using their independence to create cultural spaces where writers and philosophers gathered. Their autonomy made them patrons and cultural leaders in ways few married women could achieve. At the same time, European colonization and exploration opened new paths for women who lived without men. Some widows and unmarried women migrated to colonies, taking opportunities to own land or run businesses in ways restricted in Europe. For example, in early America, widows often inherited taverns or farms, managing them successfully on their own. This reshaped the frontier narrative, often assumed to be melted by including women who thrived without male partners. The 18th and 19th centuries, spinsters, reformers, and revolutionaries. By the 18th century, unmarried women, often pejoratively called spinsters, became a subject of social commentary. Literature mocked or pitied them, portraying them as lonely, bitter, or incomplete. Yet many spinsters carved meaningful lives for themselves. They worked as teachers, writers, or caregivers. The rise of women's education in the 19th century created new opportunities for unmarried women to pursue professions and intellectual ambitions. Some of the greatest reformers and revolutionaries of the 19th century were unmarried women. Florence Nightingale famously rejected marriage proposals to dedicate herself to nursing, reforming healthcare, and becoming a global icon of humanitarian work. Jane Addams, founder of Hull House in Chicago, never married and devoted her life to social reform, labor rights, and peace activism, earning the Nobel Peace Prize. In literature, independent women flourished as both authors and characters. Jane Austen, though never married, lived a full creative life, producing novels that critiqued the social pressures on women to marry. The Brontë sisters, too, lived largely unmarried lives, channeling their solitude into groundbreaking novels. Their characters, Jane Eyre, Cathy Earnshaw, challenged notions of female dependence. The suffrage movement itself was driven largely by women who lived independently. Many suffragists and activists either never married or lived separated lives, devoting their time to the cause of equality. Their independence was both practical and symbolic, proving that women could live meaningful, powerful lives outside of marriage. 20th century, redefining independence. The 20th century marked a dramatic shift. Wars, industrialization, and changing social norms created new opportunities for women. During World War I and II, countless women lived and worked without men, taking jobs in factories, farms, and offices while men fought at the front. Widows of war often chose not to remarry, sustaining their families independently. The feminist movements of the 20th century further challenged the stigma of singlehood. Second-wave feminism of the 1960s and 70s especially celebrated women who lived alone, framing independence as liberation from patriarchal constraints. Authors like Simone de Beauvoir, who famously never married but lived a long intellectual partnership with Jean-Paul Sartre, redefined what partnership and autonomy could mean. Cultural figures like Frida Kahlo also embodied this independence. Though married to Diego Rivera, she lived much of her life in solitude, defining herself through art, politics, and radical self-expression. Writers like Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, and Virginia Woolf, women who spent significant parts of their lives unmarried, proved that solitude could be a fertile ground for creativity. The archetype of the single woman shifted in this era. Instead of being pitied, she was increasingly seen as glamorous, free, and self-fulfilled. Figures like Katharine Hepburn, who openly rejected traditional domestic life, embodied the possibility of a woman thriving without a man. Conclusion: the hidden lineage of independent women. The history of women who lived without men is not a story of loneliness or lack, but of resilience, reinvention, and strength. Across centuries, these women found ways to thrive. As Prior Stacy's widows, mystics, rebels, artists, reformers, and revolutionaries, while society often stigmatized them, labeling them as witches, spinsters, or eccentrics. The reality is that these women preserved a lineage of independence that modern women inherit today. Their lives remind us that living without a man does not mean living without purpose. In fact, their solitude often gave them the space to create, lead, and inspire in ways that transformed history. From the Oracle of Delphi to Florence Nightingale, from Hildegard of Bingen to Simone de Beauvoir, the story of women who lived alone is the story of women who dared to live fully, on their own terms. Solitude and strength. The psychology of women choosing independence. Throughout history, solitude has often been feared, stigmatized, or pathologized, especially for women. A man living alone has long been interpreted as a bachelor, an adventurer, a philosopher, or simply a private individual. A woman living alone, however, has traditionally been perceived as a spinster, a failure, a witch, or someone incomplete without a man. Yet psychology reveals a very different truth. Solitude can be a profound source of strength, creativity, and liberation. For women who choose independence, living alone without a man is not a void but a fertile ground for self-discovery, emotional resilience, and empowerment. This session will explore the psychological dimensions of women choosing solitude, the myths they confront, the resilience they build, and the freedom they claim. The stigma of female solitude. To understand the psychology of women living independently, we must first examine the weight of cultural narratives surrounding them. Across cultures, the idea of a woman without a man has historically been framed negatively. In literature and folklore, unmarried or solitary women often became villains or objects of pity: the wicked witch, the lonely spinster, the tragic governess. In contrast, men living alone were depicted as wise sages, wandering heroes, or stoic philosophers. This double standard created a psychological burden for women who lived without men. From an early age, many women were socialized to believe that their worth hinged on marriage or motherhood. A single or child-free woman risked being labeled selfish, unnatural, or undesirable. Psychologists studying gender norms in the 20th century found that women reported higher levels of social pressure anxiety than men when unmarried past a certain age, not because they were unhappy alone, but because society projected unhappiness onto them. Despite this stigma, countless women across eras chose solitude intentionally. Some resisted marriage because it restricted their autonomy. Others embraced singleness after widowhood or divorce. For many, solitude was less about rejection by men than about self-acceptance, autonomy, and a desire to define life on their own terms. The psychological benefits of solitude. Contrary to the stereotype of loneliness, solitude can be profoundly enriching. Modern psychology distinguishes between loneliness, an unwanted sense of disconnection, and solitude, a chosen state of being alone. Women who consciously choose to live without men often describe solitude as liberating rather than isolating. Identity formation. Living alone allows women to form an identity independent of roles imposed by relationships. In patriarchal societies, women are often defined as daughters, wives, or mothers. By choosing independence, they create space to ask, "Who am I outside of these roles?" Studies in developmental psychology suggest that women living independently report higher levels of self-concept clarity, meaning they have a more defined sense of personal identity. Autonomy and control. One of the strongest psychological motivators for solitude is autonomy. Living without a man allows women to make decisions about finances, time, household management, and career without compromise or external pressure. Autonomy contributes to higher levels of self-efficacy, the belief in one's ability to direct life effectively. Creativity and productivity. Solitude has long been associated with creativity. Writers like Virginia Woolf emphasized the importance of a room of one's own as essential for artistic production. Many women report that living alone provides the mental space to explore art, writing, learning, or entrepreneurial projects. Psychologists note that solitude enhances divergent thinking, the ability to generate novel ideas. Emotional resilience. Living independently requires problem-solving and self-reliance. Women who live alone often develop higher resilience as they learn to cope with challenges without leaning on a partner. Studies show that single women often have strong support networks of friends and family, which provide emotional connection without sacrificing autonomy, freedom, and self-care. Solitude allows women to prioritize self-care without guilt. Decisions about lifestyle, health, and leisure are made without negotiation. This freedom contributes to improved mental health, as women can align their daily lives with personal rhythms rather than accommodating another's schedule. The fear of loneliness, a cultural construct. While solitude has benefits, fear of loneliness remains one of the biggest psychological barriers women face when contemplating independence. But psychologists argue that much of this fear is socially constructed. In patriarchal societies, marriage and companionship have been presented as a woman's ultimate fulfillment. Even today, media often portrays single women as incomplete until they find the one. This creates what researchers call a deficit model of singleness, the assumption that being single is a lesser state of existence. However, surveys consistently show that unmarried women, without children often report higher levels of happiness and health compared to their married counterparts. A study by sociologist Bella DePaulo revealed that single women tend to have more active social networks, stronger friendships, and more fulfilling lives than stereotypes suggest. The real risk is not solitude itself, but the stigma and judgment society places upon it. Cultural and psychological archetypes of solitary women throughout history. Solitary women have embodied different archetypes that shaped cultural perceptions and influenced psychological identities. The mystic or visionary, figures like Hildegard of Bingen or Julian of Norwich, represent solitude as a path to spiritual insight. Their independence was framed as divine devotion, legitimizing their choice. The artist or creator. Women writers and painters often needed solitude to produce their work. Virginia Woolf's insistence on a private room reflects this archetype. Solitude as creative necessity. The rebel or outsider. Women who resisted marriage or domesticity were often stigmatized as witches or eccentrics. Yet this archetype reflects courage, a willingness to defy convention for autonomy. The caregiver without ties. Many single women historically became teachers, nurses, or reformers, directing their energy into community service rather than family life. Psychologically, this archetype redefined fulfillment as service beyond domestic walls. These archetypes shaped both the external judgment and the internal self-concept of solitary women. Understanding them helps explain why women living without men could feel both empowered and marginalized at the same time. Modern psychology of independence. In modern psychology, female independence has been increasingly validated. The rise of positive psychology, which studies flourishing and well-being, has reframed solitude as a potential pathway to meaning rather than a symptom of dysfunction. Self-determination theory. This theory emphasizes three psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Women living alone often fulfill autonomy and competence strongly, while relatedness is satisfied through friendships, family, and community rather than marriage. Attachment theory and independence. Some psychologists once assumed that secure attachment required long-term partnership, but newer research suggests that healthy attachment can exist in friendships, mentorships, or women who live independently can develop secure self-attachment, where they nurture themselves with the same compassion traditionally sought in partners. Resilience and coping strategies. Solitary women often demonstrate advanced coping strategies. They learn emotional regulation, financial management, and conflict resolution without relying on a partner. This resilience translates into higher adaptability in changing life circumstances. The role of choice. Perhaps the strongest psychological factor distinguishing thriving solitary women from struggling ones is choice. Women who actively choose independence experience empowerment and satisfaction. Those who feel forced into solitude by circumstance may face more challenges. The key is reframing independence not as lack but as possibility. Challenges and psychological growth. While the benefits of solitude are clear, living without a man does come with challenges. These challenges, however, often become sources of growth. Social stigma and internalization. Solitary women may face judgment from family or community. The psychological task is resisting internalization of these stereotypes and affirming self-worth. Economic vulnerability. Living alone can mean financial strain, yet overcoming these challenges often fosters stronger financial literacy and independence. Aging and solitude. Fear of aging alone is common, but studies show that single women often cultivate broader social networks, reducing isolation in later life. Building intergenerational friendships and community ties is key. Romantic desire versus independence. Some women navigate the tension between valuing independence and desiring companionship. Psychologists suggest that reframing relationships as choices rather than necessities helps balance both needs. Case studies and real examples. Florence Nightingale rejected marriage to pursue nursing, describing marriage as domestic slavery. Psychologically, her solitude gave her the space to transform healthcare worldwide. Emily Dickinson, though often portrayed as reclusive, chose solitude as fertile ground for her poetry. Psychologists today see her choice not as pathology, but as deliberate creativity. Oprah Winfrey, one of the most influential women of modern times, chose not to marry. She has spoken about how independence gave her the freedom to focus on her career and humanitarian work without compromise. Contemporary women, Countless modern women around the world choose to live alone, pursue education, travel, and build businesses. Their psychological resilience challenges stereotypes of loneliness. Conclusion: solitude as liberation. The psychology of women choosing independence reveals a profound truth. Solitude is not a deficiency but a form of strength. Women who live without men are not incomplete. They are often deeply fulfilled, resilient, and self-possessed. By choosing autonomy, they create space for identity, creativity, and purpose that can be obscured in traditional roles. In every era, solitary women have faced stigma, yet psychology shows that their lives are often rich in meaning. As modern society evolves, the narrative is shifting. Independence is no longer a mark of failure, but a badge of courage. The women who choose solitude are not lonely, they are liberated. They embody a psychological revolution, proving that fulfillment lies not in dependence but in self-determined living. Breaking myths: society's fear of the single woman. From the earliest stories told around fires to the most modern media portrayals, one theme echoes again and again. The single woman is dangerous, incomplete, pitiable, or unnatural. She is cast as the lonely spinster, the bitter old maid, the seductress who lures men to ruin, or the witch who wields mysterious powers in her solitude. For thousands of years, society has cultivated a fear of women living without men. But why, and how did these myths endure across cultures and centuries? This session explores the origins of these myths, their psychological and social functions, and the reality that dismantles them. The truth is simple. Society feared single women because they represented independence, autonomy, and the refusal to be controlled. In breaking these myths, we reveal not only the courage of solitary women, but also the deep insecurities of patriarchal systems that sought to contain them. The roots of fear: why society distrusts independent women. To understand society's fear of the single woman, we must first examine the systems that benefited from controlling her. Patriarchy thrives when women's labor, bodies, and identities are tied to men through marriage, reproduction, and domestic roles. A woman who lived outside that system threatened the very foundation of patriarchal order. Economic threat: in societies where women's work and property were expected to flow into male households, a woman living alone disrupted inheritance patterns, land ownership, and labor structures. Social threat: a woman choosing solitude challenged gender norms. If women could thrive without men, the justification for male dominance weakened. Moral threat: religious and cultural traditions often tied female virtue to marriage and motherhood. Single women who rejected these roles symbolized defiance of divine or natural order. Thus, the myths around single women were less about their supposed flaws, and more about society's fear of what they represented. Freedom. Myth 1. The witch. The solitary woman as dangerous. One of the most enduring myths about women without men is the association with witchcraft. From medieval Europe to colonial America, women who lived alone were disproportionately accused of witchcraft. Widows, healers, and unmarried women became prime targets. Why? Because they defied the expected dependence on men. Their independence was recast as unnatural power. Healing herbs became sorcery. Solitude became evidence of sinister secrets. The witch hunts of Europe 15th–17th centuries illustrate how dangerous this myth became. Tens of thousands of women were executed, many for the simple crime of being unmarried or socially marginal. Psychologically, these persecutions reflected society's projection of fear. The witch symbolized what men could not control. Breaking the myth: modern historians and feminists now reinterpret the witch as a symbol of female resistance. She was not a villain, but often a healer, midwife, or independent woman. The label of witch was less about her and more about patriarchal panic. Myth 2. The spinster. The solitary woman as pathetic. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the figure of the spinster, or old maid, became a cultural archetype. Unlike the witch, she was not dangerous but pitiable. Society portrayed her as lonely, bitter, and unfulfilled, because she lacked a husband. Language itself reveals the stigma. The term spinster originated from women who spun thread for a living, often unmarried, because they had to support themselves. Over time, the word became synonymous with undesirability. Literature reinforced the stereotype. Novels of the 19th century often contrasted the happy wife with the tragic spinster. Yet beneath this myth lay another truth. Many spinsters lived rich, meaningful lives. They were teachers, writers, caregivers, and reformers. Jane Austen, who never married, crafted novels that remain cultural treasures. Florence Nightingale rejected marriage as a form of bondage and became the founder of modern nursing, breaking the myth. Today, increasing numbers of women embrace singleness as a valid life choice. Studies show single women often have stronger social ties and higher levels of life satisfaction than stereotypes suggest. The spinster myth collapses under the weight of evidence. Solitude does not equal misery. Myth 3. The seductress, the solitary woman, as immoral. Another recurring myth casts the single woman not as lonely, but as dangerously sexual. Without the control of a husband, she was believed to be promiscuous, luring men into ruin. From the biblical Delilah to the femme fatales of film noir, solitary women were often depicted as This myth functioned as a warning to men. Beware the independent woman, for she uses her freedom to destabilize male virtue. It also functioned as a warning to women. Remain within marriage, or risk being labeled immoral. Yet, historically, many independent women were far from seductresses. Widows often chose celibacy, preferring freedom to remarriage. Religious women dedicated their lives to chastity. Artists and writers valued creativity over romance. The myth of the seductress says more about male anxieties than female behavior. Breaking the myth. Modern culture increasingly recognizes that women's sexuality is their own to define. A woman living without a man is not automatically promiscuous. She may be celibate, monogamous, queer, or simply uninterested. The seductress myth falls apart when women reclaim agency over their bodies and choices. Myth 4. The incomplete woman, without a man. She is nothing perhaps. The most pervasive myth is the idea that a woman without a man is incomplete. From fairy tales to Hollywood films, narratives insist that a woman's story ends only when she finds a husband. The happily ever after is marriage, not subtextualization. This myth is deeply ingrained in cultural psychology. Even today, single women are often asked, "When will you settle down?" as though their current lives are temporary or unfinished. Older single women face questions about what went wrong, implying that singleness is a failure. Yet, modern psychology dismantles this myth. Studies consistently show that marriage does not guarantee happiness, and many women report higher life satisfaction when single. Women without men are not incomplete, they are whole individuals who define their lives on their own terms. Breaking the myth. The growing visibility of single, independent women in media and society challenges the idea of incompleteness. Characters like Carrie Bradshaw in Sex and the City or real-life figures like Oprah Winfrey embody fulfillment outside of marriage. The myth of incompleteness is revealed as nothing more than patriarchal propaganda. The psychological toll of these myths. While these myths are false, their psychological impact is real. For centuries, women internalized shame, fear, or self-doubt when living alone. Many were forced into marriages they did not want, simply to avoid stigma. Others lived solitary lives but endured ridicule or suspicion. Psychologists describe this as internalized misogyny, the process by which women absorb society's negative messages and turn them inward. A woman who truly wanted independence might feel guilty, believing she was selfish or abnormal. Yet, the persistence of women choosing solitude despite these pressures demonstrates extraordinary resilience. Their lives stand as acts of quiet rebellion, psychological strength, and cultural resistance. Why these myths persist even today? Remnants of these myths remain. Media still often portrays single women as tragic, desperate, or predatory. Why do such stereotypes endure in the 21st century? Patriarchal structures. Many societies still benefit economically and socially from keeping women tied to family roles. Fear of change. The sight of women thriving alone threatens traditional gender hierarchies. Cultural inertia. Myths become habits of thought, passed down unconsciously through stories, films, and jokes. But as more women visibly live independently, these myths lose power. Representation in literature, media, and politics is rewriting the cultural script. Breaking the myths. The reality of independent women. The reality is clear. Women without men are not witches, spinsters, seductresses, or incomplete beings. They are leaders, creators, thinkers, caregivers, and visionaries. Their solitude is not absence, but presence of self, freedom, and possibility. Studies show single women are often more socially connected than married women. Economically, many single women today own property, run businesses, and control finances without male guardianship. Psychologically, women who choose independence report higher autonomy and personal growth. Breaking the myths means telling these truths loudly and often. It means reclaiming the narratives of women who thrived alone and rejecting the stereotypes designed to control them. Conclusion: from fear to respect. Society's fear of the single woman reveals more about society than about women. The witch, the spinster, the seductress, and the incomplete woman were never real. They were projections of patriarchy's fear of autonomy. What patriarchy feared most was not loneliness, immorality, or incompleteness, but freedom. Today, as more women embrace independence, these myths collapse. The single woman is no longer feared or pitied. She is celebrated. She embodies resilience, creativity, and liberation. Breaking these myths frees not only women but society itself, offering new possibilities of equality and self-definition. Modern-day women living without men. In the 21st century, women are rewriting the rules of independence. Across the world, more and more women are choosing to live without men, by never marrying, divorcing, living single, or redefining companionship on their own terms. What was once stigmatized as spinsterhood is now often celebrated as empowerment, freedom, and self-fulfillment. Modern society is witnessing a quiet revolution. Women living alone are no longer symbols of pity or rebellion, but increasingly recognized as pioneers of a new social order. This session explores the realities of modern women who live without men. It will examine statistics and trends, showcase personal stories, and analyze the cultural and psychological dimensions of this movement. Far from being lonely, today's independent women are thriving, shaping careers, communities, and identities outside the traditional structures of marriage and male dependence. The global rise of single women. Statistics reveal a significant shift in women's lifestyles. Across continents, the number of women choosing to remain single or live independently has grown dramatically in the past few decades. Marriage rates declining. In the United States, marriage rates have dropped to historic lows. Census data shows that nearly half of American adults are single, and among women under 30, a majority are unmarried. Similar patterns are seen in Europe, Japan, South Korea, and parts of Latin America. Delayed marriage and childbirth. Where marriage does occur, it happens later. Women now prioritize education, careers, and personal goals, delaying or rejecting traditional family paths. In countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Germany, single living is normalized, with many women spending significant portions of their adult lives unmarried. Divorce and widowhood. Women are also increasingly leaving marriages. Divorce rates remain high globally, and many widows today choose not to remarry, finding fulfillment in autonomy. Urbanization and individualism. Cities across Asia and Africa show rising numbers of single women professionals who live alone or with friends. In China, the term leftover women Shangnu once stigmatized educated, unmarried women, but many have embraced it with pride. These trends mark a seismic cultural shift. For the first time in history, living without a man is not just tolerated, but often celebrated as a legitimate lifestyle. Economic independence and autonomy. One of the greatest enablers of modern female independence is economic empowerment. Unlike past centuries, women today increasingly control their own incomes, assets, and financial futures. Careers and education. Women now outnumber men in higher education in many countries. With advanced degrees, they enter professions once dominated by men: law, medicine, engineering, business, and sustain themselves financially. Property ownership. In many countries, legal reforms now allow women to own property and access credit. Independent women purchase homes, run businesses, and invest, creating security without dependence on a spouse. Entrepreneurship. Female entrepreneurship is rising globally. Many unmarried women build businesses that fund their independence, proving that financial autonomy is a cornerstone of self-determined living. Psychologically, economic independence reshapes women's choices. Freed from financial reliance on men, women can prioritize relationships for emotional fulfillment rather than survival. This shift undermines the old myth that marriage is a woman's only form of security. The psychological freedom of modern solitude. Modern women living without men often describe their independence as liberating. Unlike the fear-driven solitude of earlier eras, Today's independence is increasingly a conscious choice. Autonomy in daily life. Women relish the ability to make decisions without negotiation, from career paths to travel plans to interior design, time and creativity. Living alone provides space for hobbies, study, art, and personal growth. Solitude becomes a sanctuary rather than a stigma. Relationships by choice. Many single women form strong bonds of friendship, community, or romantic companionship on their own terms. They are not alone but surrounded by networks that reflect chosen, not imposed, commitments. Research backs this up. Studies in psychology show that women who live alone often report higher levels of autonomy, self-acceptance, and resilience. Their lives contradict stereotypes of loneliness. The cultural redefinition of singleness in the modern world. Media and culture play a vital role in normalizing independent women. Television and film. Shows like Sex and the City, The Bold Type, or Insecure portray single women as successful, adventurous, and fulfilled. These narratives contrast sharply with older depictions of single women as tragic or villainous. Literature and memoir. Writers like Cheryl Strayed, Wilde, and Elizabeth Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love, celebrate journeys of self-discovery outside traditional relationships. Their stories inspire women globally to see independence as opportunity. Social media. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube showcase independent women traveling, creating, and building careers. This visibility dismantles the shame of singleness and creates global communities of support. Cultural shifts are crucial in breaking myths. They provide positive archetypes of women who thrive without men, making independence aspirational rather than stigmatized. Challenges modern independent women face despite progress. Living without men still comes with challenges, both external and internal. Social pressure. Even in progressive societies, women still face questions like, when will you get married? Or don't you want children? These assumptions imply that independence is temporary. For many, resisting these pressures requires psychological resilience. Economic inequality. Although women earn more than ever, wage gaps and structural barriers remain. Independent women may face greater financial strain, especially in societies with limited social safety nets. Safety and security. Women living alone often contend with safety concerns in public and private spaces. Fear of harassment, burglary, or violence can complicate solitude. Aging and loneliness. Concerns about growing old without a partner remain common. Yet research shows that single women often maintain stronger social ties than married peers, mitigating isolation in later years. These challenges revealed that while independence has expanded, systemic inequalities and cultural expectations still shape women's experiences. Case studies. Women thriving without men. Oprah Winfrey, one of the world's most powerful women. Oprah never married. She built an empire on her terms, often speaking about the freedom independence gave her to focus on her career and philanthropy. Gloria Steinem, the feminist icon, married late in life but spent decades single, using her independence to drive global activism. Her life reflects how independence fuels public influence. Professional women in Asia. In cities like Tokyo, Seoul, and Shanghai, many women delay or reject marriage to pursue careers and lifestyles. Though sometimes stigmatized, they often report satisfaction in autonomy. Everyday independent women. Millions of teachers, nurses, artists, entrepreneurs, and travelers embody the modern independent woman. They may not be famous, but their lives are revolutionary. Proof that fulfillment exists outside traditional scripts. The rise of new forms of companionship and dependence does not always mean isolation. Many women living without men explore alternative forms of companionship. Friendship networks. Deep, long-term friendships often function as chosen families. Women invest emotionally in friends with the same intensity once reserved for spouses. Communal living. Some women form collective households with friends or like-minded individuals, creating supportive communities. Pet companionship. Pets provide affection, structure, and joy for millions of single women. Digital communities. Online groups connect independent women globally, offering solidarity, advice, and celebration of freedom. These forms of companionship redefine human connection, proving that intimacy and support do not require marriage. The political and social impact of independent women. The growing presence of women living without men also reshapes societies politically and socially. Voting power. single women increasingly form a powerful voting bloc. In the US, unmarried women played a decisive role in several recent elections, shaping policy debates around healthcare, reproductive rights, and equality. Cultural influence. Independent women influence media, fashion, and literature. Their visibility expands representation and challenges stereotypes. Policy demands. Women living without men highlight the need for policies that support independence, affordable housing, healthcare, childcare for single mothers, and safety measures. As a demographic force, independent women demand recognition, not as exceptions but as a growing norm. Modern myths versus realities. Even in the present, myths about single women persist, but reality consistently disproves them. Myth: single women are lonely. Reality: many single women report richer social lives and more freedom for travel, hobbies, and community involvement. Myth: single women are selfish. Reality: independent women often invest in friendships, communities, and careers that benefit others. Myth: single women regret their choices. Reality: research shows that regret is no higher among single women than married women. In fact, many divorced women express relief and renewed joy in independence. Breaking these myths requires amplifying the voices of real women whose lives disprove them daily. Conclusion: independence as a modern revolution. Modern-day women living without men embody a profound shift in human history. No longer confined to stereotypes of witches, spinsters, or tragic figures, they stand as symbols of freedom and possibility. Their lives challenge outdated assumptions and open new models of fulfillment. Economically, they prove women can thrive without male support. Psychologically, they show that solitude can be empowering. Culturally, they rewrite narratives that once confined women to marriage. Politically, they emerge as forces for change, shaping societies toward equality. The truth is that modern independent women are not anomalies. They are pioneers. Their lives are testimonies to resilience, self-determination, and the expanding horizons of female freedom. Far from being feared or pitied, they deserve recognition as trailblazers who model what it means to live fully, courageously, and authentically without needing a man to define them. The future of female independence. History tells us that women who lived without men were once feared, pitied, or erased. Psychology tells us that solitude can be liberating, creative, and deeply fulfilling. Modern society shows us countless examples of women thriving independently. But what about the future? What does the next century hold for female independence? The coming decades will see transformations in technology, economics, culture, and global demographics that will reshape how women live, love, and define themselves. Already, trends point to a future in which independence is not an exception but a norm. Far from being lonely or marginal, women who live without men will increasingly shape politics, economics, and culture worldwide. This session explores the future of female independence, the forces driving it, the challenges ahead, and the possibilities that lie beyond patriarchal myths. 1. Demographic shifts and the decline of marriage across the globe. Marriage rates are declining, and this trend shows no sign of reversing. Later or no marriage. Women are marrying later or not at all. By 2050, demographers project that in many developed nations, over one-third of women will remain unmarried throughout their lives. Declining fertility rates. Fertility rates are dropping worldwide, with many women choosing not to have children. This reflects both personal preference and economic realities. Growing elderly populations. As life expectancy increases, more women will live longer portions of their lives unmarried, widowed, or divorced. Independent living will define a significant phase of adulthood, not just a temporary condition. The future suggests a society where single women are not outliers, but a large demographic force. This reality will demand cultural, political, and economic recognition. 2. Technology and the tools of independence. Technology is revolutionizing independence for everyone, but especially for women. Financial technology, apps and online platforms enable women to manage money, invest, and build wealth without intermediaries. This democratization of finance gives women unprecedented autonomy. Remote work and careers. The rise of digital work allows women to pursue careers globally, while living independently in cities, towns, or even rural areas. Remote work reduces dependence on marriage as a financial safety net. Healthcare advances. From reproductive health apps to telemedicine, women gain greater control over their bodies and medical choices. Future technologies like artificial wombs may further decouple reproduction from traditional family structures. Safety and security. Smart home technology, personal safety apps, and online communities provide women living alone with tools to enhance security and reduce risks once used to justify dependence on men. Technology, in short, makes independence not only possible but practical. 3. Cultural shifts. Redefining family and relationships. The concept of family is expanding beyond the nuclear model. In the future, women living without men will help redefine what kinship and community mean. Chosen families. Many single women already build families of friends, siblings, and community members. This trend will grow as stigma fades. Communal living, co-housing, and intentional communities offer women ways to share resources and companionship without marriage. Such arrangements are growing among millennials and Gen Z. Flexible relationships. Relationships themselves are being reimagined. Some women choose casual partnerships, long-distance companionships, or non-traditional arrangements without merging households or finances. Global sisterhood. Digital platforms connect women across borders, creating international solidarity networks that replace the isolation once associated with singleness. These cultural shifts dismantle the myth that only marriage provides stability, intimacy, or meaning. 4. Economic and political power of independent women. As the number of independent women grows, so does their collective influence. Economic power. Women control a growing share of global wealth. By 2030, women are projected to control over $30 trillion in assets worldwide. Single women's spending power shapes industries from real estate to travel. Political influence. Unmarried women already form significant voting blocs. Their priorities, healthcare, reproductive rights, housing, and equality, will reshape political agendas. Workforce leadership. As independent women rise to leadership roles in corporations, academia, and government, they will model alternative lifestyles that normalize independence. Independence is not only personal but political. The collective force of independent women is already transforming laws, markets, and cultural norms, and this influence will only grow. 5. Challenges on the horizon. The future of female independence is promising, but not without obstacles. Persistent patriarchy. In many parts of the world, women still face legal and cultural barriers to independence, from guardianship laws to economic inequality. Economic inequality, wage gaps, and lack of affordable housing disproportionately affect single women. Without structural reforms, independence may remain easier for privileged women than for others. Social stigma in conservative societies. In cultures where marriage remains a strong expectation, independent women may face discrimination, harassment, or exclusion. Aging and care. As populations age, independent women will need new models of care. Governments and communities must prepare systems that support elders without relying on marriage or children. These challenges highlight that independence is not only a personal choice but a societal responsibility. To ensure all women can thrive independently, systemic changes are required. 6. The psychology of the future. Embracing autonomy, psychologists predict that future generations of women will normalize independence to such an extent that the myths of loneliness or failure will vanish. Autonomy, once stigmatized, will be celebrated as a human right. Identity development. Women will increasingly define themselves by careers, passions, and communities rather than marital status. Mental health benefits. With stigma reduced, women will experience less anxiety about being single. Solitude will be recognized as restorative rather than isolating. Generational shifts. Younger generations already view singleness differently than older ones. For many Gen Z women, marriage is optional, not mandatory. This shift will expand into the mainstream. The psychological landscape of the future will favor choice, authenticity, and self-definition. 7. Imagining future archetypes. As myths of witches, spinsters, and seductresses fade, new archetypes of independent women will emerge. The pioneer, women who travel, innovate, and build lives alone, will be celebrated as cultural explorers. The leader, independent women in politics, business, and arts, will symbolize authority and vision. The mentor, older single women will guide younger generations, offering models of flourishing outside traditional roles. The creator, writers, artists, and thinkers will continue to show how solitude fosters creativity. These archetypes will reshape collective imagination, ensuring that independence is associated not with fear, but with admiration. 8. Global perspectives. Different paths, same future. While trends vary across cultures, the future of independence is global. Western nations, independence is already normalized, with growing policies supporting single living. Asia, in countries like Japan, South Korea, and China, cultural stigma remains, but economic and social realities push women toward later marriage or lifelong singleness. The so-called parasite singles or leftover women are increasingly redefining themselves as proud independents. Africa and Latin America, urbanization and education are creating new spaces for women's independence, though traditional expectations still linger. Middle East, change is slower due to legal restrictions, but women are increasingly carving independent lives through education and careers. The paths differ, but the trajectory is clear. More women everywhere are living independently, challenging norms, and reshaping futures. 9. Toward a post-patriarchal society. Ultimately, the future of female independence points toward a larger transformation, the erosion of patriarchal systems that once demanded women's dependence. As more women thrive alone, society will be forced to redefine family, intimacy, success, and community. Success will no longer be measured by marriage but by fulfillment. Family will be chosen, not imposed. Intimacy will be diverse, not uniform. Community will expand beyond bloodlines. This post-patriarchal vision does not exclude men but liberates everyone. Men too may benefit from dismantling the pressure to be providers, protectors, or patriarchs. Independence for women paves the way for equality in relationships, where companionship is based on choice, not necessity. Conclusion: a future of freedom. The future of female independence is not just a possibility, it is already unfolding. Demographic shifts, technological advances, cultural redefinitions, and psychological resilience are converging to make independence a central reality of modern life. Women who live without men are not anomalies but the vanguard of a new era. In this future, solitude is not stigma but sanctuary. Independence is not rebellion but empowerment. And women are not incomplete without men. They are architects of their own destinies, pioneers of new forms of family, community, and meaning. The myths that once haunted solitary women will fade into history, remembered only as relics of a fearful patriarchy. In their place will rise new narratives of strength, creativity, and joy in self-defined living. The truth is clear: the future belongs to independent women, and in their freedom lies the liberation of all humanity.